Hi, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connection. Each of us have stories that help us understand each other and help to bring our community closer together. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who've had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who've had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories. Community Connections is about these people and about their stories. I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting these amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Please enjoy. Welcome to Community Connections. My name is Gordy Hogue, and I am delighted to have Rick O'Connor as today's guest. Rick is president and CEO of Black Press. He is responsible for local newspapers across British Columbia and papers in Alberta, Ohio, Hawaii. He has been honored with the Dean Leisure Award for his contributions to North American suburban newspapers and the Silver Quill Award from the Canadian Newspaper Association. He started the newspaper business in 1978 in Vanderhoof, and we're going to talk about how he worked his way to this community along that way. He's been instrumental in the promotion of our community, volunteering in many areas, sponsoring a vintage affair, Torchlight Parade, the Tour de White Rock. He has volunteered as chair of the Peace Arch Hospital Foundation and served there. He's promoted soccer, Renegade softball, Tritons baseball, UBC softball. And he's obviously made a profound positive difference in our community, and he understands how important community is to the welfare of the people living there. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Gordy.
So can you talk a little bit about you went to school, I think, in Vancouver, and talk about growing up there and going to school there, how you got to Vanderhoof, and the story of how you made your way here.
Well, I actually went to school in East Vancouver, grew up there. My father actually was born in East Vancouver and he grew up there, so we're a bit of a rarity in British Columbia. I actually started out wanting to be a teacher, and so I went to UBC, enrolled in the education program, but after a year didn't think it was really the vocation for me. So I decided to give broadcasting a try and went to BCIT after that. Spent a couple of years there earning my broadcast journalism diploma. And back in those days, as you know, you didn't start off at CKNW. You had to start off at a very small radio station in a very small town in BC. So that led me to work at a satellite station in Vanderhoof from CJCI, which was a Prince George station. And my job was essentially I had a morning show and then went out and sold advertising, came back and produced that advertising. Then I covered events at night and, did it all, 6-7 days a week for a long time in that small town for a couple of years.
And then you eventually, you sold your car?
Yeah, no, I sold my car to get some cash to buy some newspaper production equipment and started a paper to compete with the existing paper, which, had fallen out of favor with most of the town folk, so to speak, and especially the businesses. So I got support from the businesses and, applied kind of the same principles that I'd learned in journalism through radio, which is, cover as many events and get as much content in your product as possible. And names, faces, places was the key. And we were very successful. And that led me to buy another paper in Fort St. James in 1980. And eventually I got tired of the North and sold those businesses to Black Press. Those papers are still part of Black Press today, still actually very successful still. And so, here I am. I hesitate to say how many years later, still doing what I set out to do back in 1978.
And you came to the Lower Mainland and you went up to Kamloops for a little while as well?
Yeah, no, I I came back to Lower Mainland. I ran some sister papers to the Peace Arch News in the late 80s in Maple Ridge. And then tried moving back to Kamloops, started a paper there, which is still the paper of record in Kamloops, Kamloops This Week. And didn't our family really didn't like the climate, so to speak, and the smaller town still after my wife got a taste of the big cities. So we moved back to actually work in Vancouver and located in South Surrey.
And have been there ever since.
Yeah, that was 1991. So we've been almost 30 years living in both South Surrey and now White Rock. So just love the community and love the vibrancy that exists and how people are so passionate about their community and so involved. It's a wonderful place to raise a family.
And you've been an active part of that commitment and engagement as well. So there are some significant challenges coming on currently with local newspapers and the pandemic and the negative impact that's had, and a number of small towns where the real only way of connecting is local newspapers, and as that's becoming more and more part of social media. Can you talk about the impact that's having in the newspaper industry and how we can ensure that we're able to maintain those local connections that are so important to small communities in particular?
Yeah, I mean, really, COVID has impacted a lot of businesses, including ours. For example, in the month of April and May, our advertising revenues dropped in half overnight. So it's been, a crisis over the last 3 or 4 months. I am happy to say, though, that July advertising revenues are probably in the low 20% range compared to the year prior. So we are making some progress as the community opens up. But, the downside to, the loss of advertising revenue is, of course, you have to reduce your expenses. And one of the things we've done in the Lower Mainland and also on our island papers is we've reduced frequency of the print product from twice a week to once a week. And that's impactful. And we've had to put a number of employees, including several journalists, on a shortened work week. So they're just not producing as much content, obviously, as they did before. So those are two of the probably largest impacts that we've had. Certainly the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program is being a godsend for us and has allowed us to, get through this process. But the irony is that at the end of the day, our digital audience more than doubled through the spring. And more, people were consuming, for example, on the Peace Arch News website, more than 1 million page views a month. To give you a perspective, 5 years ago, that total was maybe 5,000 page views a month. And so the irony is that as our digital audience grows, and our print audience is still very strong as well, but what's happening is our audience is going in an upward fashion and our revenue is going in a downward fashion. And they used to run in parallel and now they're running at cross purposes. So, we really have to, on a long-term basis, figure out a new business model for local community media because, if we can't rely on advertising, if there are a few flyers, then there's going to be smaller and fewer community media available for people to consume. And I think that's a bad thing for any community, is to lose the power of your community media.
Yeah. And I think that the value reflected in that is so important in terms of those connections about local and particularly small communities and communities like ours. Now, the taxation issues, we've talked a little bit in the past about some of those issues and some role that the federal and provincial governments can play more actively in ensuring that we hold on to this most valuable resource for communities and for people in them. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the areas you see as opportunities there to ensure that we hold on to these local connections?
Yeah, I mean, there's a group of us that are of companies that are working together to try and come up with some proposals for the federal government to what I call balance the taxation playing field. For example, years ago, there was a statute, I believe it's called Section 19 or something, whereby if a Canadian business advertised in a U.S. Print publication, they could not deduct that expense from their income taxes. And so over the years, that statute was never modernized, along with a lot of other government statutes have not been modernized to account for the digital age. And so, for example, now somebody could advertise on Google or Facebook and still deduct that expense, even though Google and Facebook are not contributing any content or taxes to the Canadian ecosystem. So, really what we need to do is modernize some of our approaches to this issue in Canada. And, I'm pleased to say that the current government is at least all ears and is concerned about the issue and is looking forward to future dialogue with us.
So are you developing a plan to approach the government, some strategies around that is a coalition across?
Yeah, there's two countries have sort of been at the forefront of it, France and now Australia. Australia has sort of taken what France did and turbocharged it and, basically said, look, you're not to Google and Facebook, you're not going to operate in our country and kill the advertising ecosystem without contributing something along the way to ensure that we have the news that, the local news, the national news, the community news that our citizens need. And so, I'm really happy that, we have a number of different ideas that are different from what Australia and France have proposed. But ultimately, we have to come up with a solution that is ongoing and is market-based, and where the government really doesn't need to be involved because the system allows for a change in market behavior, so to speak.
So you're developing something there as a coalition across Canada of newspapers across Canada making that submission? So is that something that chambers of commerces, that nonprofit societies, that engagements across who understand how important local newspapers are can support you in some fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I always tell this story where the value of local media and, some mayors, and you being a mayor in White Rock and a politician, and some mayors, of course, would be happy if we didn't have any journalists asking questions. But, the reality is that people value it in immense ways. I set up a meeting about 2 or 3 years ago in Grand Forks with the mayor of Grand Forks. And, he heard I was coming to the community. We own the Grand Forks Gazette, which is the newspaper there. And I learned later that he was freaking out because he thought I was there to close the paper. He had heard so much about it, and he was just petrified that they would be left with their Facebook group sniping at each other and not, a news media as an arbitrator of truth. And so, I said, no, I'm just here to ask you how we can work with you more to make the community better. And he was just so relieved. And it struck me that I don't think we realize in the news media the value of the job that we do, and we don't trumpet it enough because, and how critical it is that journalism takes place, proper journalism takes place, so that you manage a decorum. You look at what's happening in the United States with a public discourse, political discourse. It's shocking, really, as to what's happening. And through this all, like every day there's a new news desert being created when a media goes down, and yet Google and Facebook, their stock keeps going up, their revenue keeps going up, and we're headed for a very difficult time politically in public discourse if we don't make sure that we have strength in local media, whether that's a newspaper, radio station, a digital website, you name it. It's critically important.
So when we talk about the globalization of so many things that was happening in terms of economies becoming more globalized, and in the last 5 or 6 years, there seem to be more boundaries and borders growing up. Yet we're still allowing Facebook and Google to go across all of those boundaries and doing that in a free way without having to compensate, to pay the taxpayers and give an unfair advantage to them over local newspapers, yet people really want to hold on to the connection that comes with local newspapers. So I'm sure there are ways that you and the people you're working with are developing strategies around that, but it seems to me that there is some value in local communities, councils like Grand Forks talking about how important that is, and local communities across Canada saying that, because a loss of that local connectedness, that we get into satellite TV and satellite radio and everything we get is a global perspective run by Google and Facebook, then we're going to lose a lot of the values that are so important to people in communities, as well as losing our whole sense of the democratic process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, to me, an independent, strong media is critical to the democratic process.
Absolutely.
And you're seeing what can happen in the United States as when that whole system breaks down. And so people are just sniping at each other anonymously through Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And so I do think there is a role for governments to at least police the system. I think they have to, remove themselves at some point. But there needs to be a level playing field. I mean, one of the things that we do, we employ, like 1,000 British Columbians, for example. And we also employ in other jurisdictions like Hawaii and Washington State and Alaska and Alberta. And we employ people, we pay taxes in these communities, but you don't see companies like Google and Facebook employing very many people in our jurisdictions, and they're certainly not contributing anything to the democratic process. They're just simply capturing the advertising and giving very little back in return. Like, for example, $1 that enters the ad tech ecosystem ends up on our plate digitally, if we serve that ad, at 50 cents on the dollar. When we sell it directly, we get 100 cents on the dollar. And even if we take advertising from a local advertising agency, we still get 85 cents usually on the dollar. So you can see the impact of that, to a business where, you had to give up 50% of your margin on every dollar that you accepted from the ad tech ecosystem, which Google dominates. So, to me, going forward, we just need to figure out a way when our page views increase or our readership increases, then we need to be rewarded for that. And what's happening is, as our editorial work increases and improves in value, we're not getting compensated for it because Google is just taking so many dollars out of the ad tech ecosystem that doesn't make it to the publisher. And whether we're the publisher or it's some other media, it doesn't really matter. Anybody who serves ads on Google is facing the same problem.
So with this pandemic, there may be an opportunity. We sort of are accepting some of the downturns as a result of this, but it seems like it's an opportune time to recognize that as we come out of this pandemic, that we should be looking at things differently and making sure that we're not starting to accept some of these notions, whether it's the Union of BC Municipalities or the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and having those local communities saying how valuable this is and making that statement to the federal government, making that statement probably internationally in terms of how important it is for democracy, for connectedness. And the further we get removed from that connectedness, the less engaged we are in the decision-making process, and the more we become victims of international media, of Google and advertising and Facebook, rather than the local opinion and facts coming out of local communities.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, as a community, like our community, and not just our community, but others, the most important thing is to support our local supply chains.
Absolutely.
For starters, because you can see what happens. People came into all the stores in South Surrey, White Rock 2 or 3 months ago, and still today finding empty shelves. And, then when they really check into it, they find, well, the supply chain goes all the way to China or Thailand or Mexico. And they find that, oh, gee, the supply chains got interrupted and we don't have these products. And it's critically important in the food supply chain that we support local. And, to me, one of the things that I've been talking to our papers about is basically really pushing the local angle, support local. If a person is invested in a business in the community, then you should be supporting them, because they're the ones who are supporting, the sports teams and the community clubs, and those dollars stay in the community and keep going. If you go support, I'm a bit of a critic of Costco and their contribution to our community. And, and I get on my wife all the time if she's going there. But, I used to say, like, back in the old days, Costco had the thing where the cash went up the tubes, right, from the tills. And I said, I think those tubes just go straight down to Kirkland, Washington, and never see any return to BC and to the local community. And I think that we have to really start thinking that way, because Google and Facebook is a microcosm of globalization trends, where the benefits accrue to a very small group of people and the impact is local. And so whether it's media or food or manufacturing or anything else, we need to be supporting people who are living in our community, supporting our community, paying taxes, supporting community clubs and events, and really getting involved to make our communities better. I mean, one of the reasons why I think people love to live on the Semiahmoo Peninsula is because, there's so much, so many things you can do there. There's so much involvement. Every club is outstanding, compared to their peer group. Like even the councils, like people get involved in the White Rock Council and the Surrey councils in a very passionate way and have for years. And so you don't see that in every town in BC. And I've lived in lots of towns where people are very passive about their community. And so to me, the way to make your community better is support people locally and to think about how your supply chains can get interrupted. What happens if we have an earthquake, a massive one? If we do not have local supply chains, we're going to be in trouble. And so, if there's a lesson to the pandemic, is that, which is make sure that we have a strong local infrastructure, no matter what the product or service.
So you're reflecting some important values in terms of citizenship and participation in community. If you had the power to implement some policies around that and talk about how we might make those differences. What type of policies would you see coming in place rather than just reflecting those values which are so important and calling upon people to respond to the needs of the people they live with and work with in the community? What provincial, maybe even local policies from councils, from provinces and federally, what type of policies or principles should go in place to ensure that we protect those values that you're so clearly eloquently expressing?
You know, I don't know if you can put policies in place, Gord. You know, I mean, I think it's, you know, really we have to create a culture. We have to create a culture of innovation in Canada. So, you know, to me, I don't think Canada is as innovative as it should be.
Okay.
I think that that stems from, I don't know, maybe it's a culture in Canada that we've always been second best to the United States, for example. That's been our philosophy, that, you know, we're a bit laissez-faire as well as in terms of our economy. I do think that, you know, governments need to put incentives in place for entrepreneurs to create innovation and to start businesses and that sort of thing. I mean, one of the things I was talking to the BC Business Council and this week, and they're just asking, you know, what's the impact of COVID on us? And I said, you know, one of the things you see what's happening here is that the regulatory burden in Canada as it relates to labor and potential innovation is too restrictive. And I think that going forward, I think what we have to do is to take our institutions like employment standards and WorkSafe and all these, you know, really well-meaning organizations, and we have to create some flexibility within them so that people can innovate without sort of having one hand tied behind their back. And I really do think that the federal government needs to do a lot more in terms of promoting and fostering innovation. I don't think they do. And I'm not just talking about the current political setup in Ottawa. I'm talking, this has been in existence for a long time. You know, it's during my working life, I don't see innovation happening at the pace that it has happened, for example, in the United States, or even some of the countries in Southeast Asia. You know, Vietnam. You know, I mean, I've lived through the Vietnam War, and now I see how innovative they are, and compared to them, we're not. And so why is that? You know, and I think there's just too many restrictive type of policies already in place. And I think we need to loosen that.
Like, that's a really important message, and probably a good message for us to leave on, and to ensure that that is passed on. So, Rick, is there any final words you'd like to pass on other than that little mantra you just gave us?
I'd like to, you know, take this opportunity to thank all of the people in the South Surrey community in particular, who through this last 4 or 5 months has reached out with either messages of support or, you know, bought ads in our paper, even though they didn't have anything to advertise, just to give us some revenue. And, you know, it's really fantastic that how the people have, you know, helped us through this process. And also like to thank you for all the years that you've put into the community as well. If everybody worked as hard as you do for the community, it would be an even better place to live than it is today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I think we're pretty fortunate I feel pretty blessed to have been a part of this community and having all of the encouragement that comes from so many people and so many people contributing. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.